he doesn't want to respond or talk about what Israel may or may not have done to the Iranian consulate and could have caused or inspired, I guess you could use that word, the Iranians to do the strike on Israel. That, of course, most of them were intercepted, but it was still an attempt to strike Israel directly. 99% of the 300 vehicles, both drones, ballistic missiles, and otherwise, were intercepted. If it is fine to involve planes and interceptors and that conversation, and to involve British airmen in that conversation, why can't we involve British airmen in intercepting missiles and bombs and rockets that are firing at Ukrainian cities out west? Why is this only applying to Israel, a nation with nuclear weapons that can more than defend itself from invasion, but not from the nation that gave up its nuclear weapons for the West and is currently fighting a war of existential survival? That's not to say that October 7th wasn't horrific. That's not to say Israel doesn't have some security concerns in the region, but nobody in their wildest dreams imagines that Tel Aviv is going to be bowled over by Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas. Where when we talk about Kiev, while it's still unlikely, obviously due to the slow advance of the Russian army and the high losses, but with the ammo shortage now being 10-1 according to the Ukrainian government and 30-1 when it comes to the Air Force, and we're seeing strikes on Ukrainian energy infrastructure and production facilities out west, why not involve the RAF Air Force and blowing up those missiles, blowing up those rockets? Let's listen.
Should be on them.
And by the way, this conversation doesn't just stop at the United Kingdom. We're going to move on because we're seeing a lot of officials getting confronted with this. And we see Zelensky himself calling this out for hypocrisy, which is only bringing up the critique of Western governments for not doing this.
Last couple of questions. Lord Cameron, we've talked about the need and the brilliance of the RAF in shooting down drones and missiles over Iraq and Syria.
Brilliance.
Why can't they do it over Ukraine?
Well, it's a very good question. Look, we've done more than any other country, I think, individually to help the Ukrainians. We've trained 60,000.
More than any other country individually to help the Ukrainians. I mean, per capita, that's not true. And it's also not true when it comes to total contributions. I'm kind of at a loss when it comes to how you could measure that. Now, that's not to take away credit from the British when you look at their size and military power, you know. I mean, it kind of balances out a little bit, and they did train a lot of people, but they're not the total biggest contributor, and they're not the most contributing per capita. They were the first to send the large Western tanks with the Crusader tanks, which then barreled the way for other vehicles to be sent over. They also sent over the Storm Shadow missiles. So there's ways that they've helped that others have not, and have in fact refused to help, and they have broken kind of some norms in order to advance the aid effort to Ukraine. But that is a mighty claim.
As Ukrainian troops, we were the first to give them anti-tank weapons, long-range artillery and tanks. I think the difficulty with what you suggest is if you want to avoid an escalation in terms of a wider European war, I think the one thing you do need to avoid is NATO troops directly engaging Russian troops. That would be a danger of escalation. So I've said both here in the UK, but more importantly to all our allies around the world, is do everything you can to support Ukraine in terms of money, in terms of diplomacy, and crucially in terms of weapons.
But they're not. But they're not doing that. They're not. There's 100 Patriot air defense systems in Europe. 7. Take 7 of those, 10 of those, throw them into Ukraine. It could make a major difference. Most of those Patriots are positioned for a potential war with the Russians as well. So it's not like you would even be contributing to a completely separate effort than they were made to support in the first place. But, I mean, this would be brilliant if we were giving the Ukrainians enough stingers to shoot down the drones, but we aren't. This would be brilliant if we're giving the Ukrainians enough air defense to shoot it down all by themselves, but we aren't. So, I mean, this would be a great point, and it would stand firm if the West had fulfilled those commitments to the point where the Ukrainians are not worried about these strikes in the West. But we just had another power plant right outside of Kiev get blown up. We've seen hydroelectric power plant after hydroelectric power plant. I think 80, so is it 100% now? I know it's 80 to 100% of hydroelectric power plants have been destroyed. And they're keeping up the bombing efforts. They're increasing the bombing efforts. My God, I don't have anything pulled up besides one example, so I guess I'll just show that. But here's an example of a gynecology clinic in Chernihiv. I'm sorry, I'm very bad at pronunciation still, even after going on 3 years, that was destroyed in Russian bombing. Now there's tons of locations that are like this. So it's, I mean, this point in principle stands on its own if they were fulfilling those commitments.
Giving them weapons to defend themselves, training their troops, those are absolutely the right things to do. And we've done more of that than anyone. But actually putting NATO forces directly in conflict with Russian forces, I think that would be a dangerous escalation.
Well, why not shoot down unmanned drones, Lord Cameron?
That's a great follow-up question.
Well, we are doing everything we can to help Ukrainians shoot down unmanned drones, and that's
not true. I mean, if they were doing everything they could, then they would have much more air defense systems. If that was true of Europe, there's 100 Patriots in Europe. If you're doing everything you could, more of those would have been sent over.
Is what they've
but we do it for Israel, but not Ukraine.
To do. Well, actually, what we're doing is an interesting question.
By the way, here's the question of escalation. His point was you cannot have NATO forces and Russian forces fighting directly, because the idea, if you shoot down a Russian plane, then it could cause World War III. Now, I would point to the fact that an American drone was already knocked out of the sky by the Russians in international waters over the Black Sea, and both the Russians and the Americans purposefully de-escalated the situation because neither of them want World War III. And I'll also point to the fact that Russian missiles have not given the same respect when it comes to our airspace, because there have been Russian missiles that have gone into Polish airspace multiple times, turned around and hit Ukrainian targets. So, I mean, it feels like one side is playing this a lot more risky, or a lot more with confidence that the West has no interest in escalation, even though we also think that the Russians don't want to escalate to World War III for obvious self-preservation reasons. But if we're talking about direct combat with Russian troops, we're not talking about shooting down Russian planes. We're not talking about killing Russian soldiers. What we're talking about is shooting down unmanned vehicles, missiles, ballistic missiles, because Ukraine is the only country in the world that is facing a sustained ballistic missile attack not even bi-weekly, weekly, and unmanned drones. Why is it that, and I mean, look, the unmanned drone stuff, the Ukrainians are much better at dealing with that, and they can do that on the back of pickup trucks. It's quite impressive how innovative they can be. And of course, some get through, but it's a lot easier for them to deal with that. But when we're talking about ballistic missiles, the shooting these down doesn't kill anyone. It doesn't kill Russian troops. All it would do is restrict the Russians from killing more Ukrainians and destroying the Ukrainian infrastructure that the West is trying to invest in, its military infrastructure, its production, its energy infrastructure, and trying to keep afloat. I mean, we can invest in all of the energy repair kits and send over engineers and do all that in the world, but if we do all the effort to fix a building and then they just blow it up again, what have we accomplished? We've accomplished nothing. And since the Chinese are still sustaining the Russian war effort with microchips, despite our sanctions, despite our, I would say, best efforts is given a little bit too much credit. But it feels like there needs to be another solution here to at least protect Western Ukraine. The more I think about it, the more I lean towards Western Ukraine being protected by NATO or individual military aircraft. That means like Polish aircraft, French aircraft. It could be on a unilateral basis or multilateral basis, or as a coalition outside of NATO if the concern is a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia. But again, these missiles are already entering Polish airspace. There could be an argument of, hey, since they keep entering the airspace of NATO countries, if anything, we need to shoot them before they enter these Western provinces, shoot them down just in case they enter our airspace, since it's already been done in Romania and Poland multiple times, not once, but multiple times. So I think that one could make the argument of keeping this away from World War III, keeping it away from direct conflict with Russian troops, while also saving lives, saving NATO airspace integrity. And I think you can make a good argument for it. But I don't know if any European country is ready to make that argument. Besides maybe the French, but I mean, the French need to not just talk the talk, they need to walk the walk. Once they start aligning their verbal commitments with monetary commitments and increasing it, and so that they're one of the leaders on Ukraine aid and not on the lower end per capita on Ukraine aid. And I'm not just talking about including the EU bundles, I mean on a unilateral basis, then I think that their deterrence would increase. I think their word would be given more respect, and then maybe they could entertain stuff like this. Because I know that conversations about this are happening in NATO facilities, in rooms between diplomats, and the French and the Estonians and the Latvians. This is a conversation that's happening. And so the question is, could you make the argument for it? I think you could. I think you could.
We're doing in with respect to Israel is filling in for the Americans in terms of Opsheda, and then using our jets, if they can, to shoot down missiles.
I mean, what better use of our aircraft intercepting bombs that are meant for civilian urban centers? What better use? Nobody dies, lives are saved.
And drones, but actually they're not necessarily the best way of shooting down missiles and drones. Air defense systems are actually more effective.
Okay, so either send them sufficient air defense or find another solution, or we're just going to keep coming back to this, and Ukrainians are going to keep pushing at this. They're going to keep looking at it and saying, so, okay, you're willing to escalate with the Iranians, you're willing to escalate with them, and if he's saying this is direct conflict between, British troops and Russian troops, then you're fine with direct conflicts between British troops and Iranian troops? Is that fine? I'd love to hear that and answer to that question.
And what Ukraine needs right now is not Western planes over their skies trying to shoot things down. What they desperately want, and what we need to give them, is more air defense systems. They particularly want the Patriot defense systems. Now, Britain doesn't have Patriots. Other European countries do. Americans do. And I think there's actually quite interesting movement at the moment of more Patriot systems being sent to Ukraine. That's what they want. That's what they need. And that's what we should get them.
Well, you've put in a shift trying to achieve that. You went over to the US to try and bring that.
It's very convenient that they aired the ones I'm saying. Well, this is the thing we should do. I just so happen not to have any of them, but I'm in favor of sending the thing that we have no power to send. Sorry, it's just continuing.
But sadly, you didn't get to meet the House Speaker, Mike Johnson. How frustrated were you, Lord Cameron?
Oh, not at all, because I've met Speaker Johnson on my last visit. I wasn't down to see him this time, and a meeting couldn't be arranged, but I met many very important people in Congress in terms of leaders of Republicans and Democrats in...
Okay, well, I don't need to hear that. But I'm not the only person that's asking this question, and it's not only that reporter that's asking this question. This is a question that has been asked directly of State Department officials. And here's an example. Alex, which, by the way, he follows me on Twitter, and he covers the South Caucasus and that area. He covers, like, Georgia and areas like that. I would just like to say he's smart, not just because he follows me, but because also he follows me on Twitter.
On the region.
But I wanted to show you him asking the same question to a Department of State official. And what's interesting is he asked this question, and it's treated as almost ridiculous in this interview. Then, as Zelensky makes the same critique, see how he gets a different response next time. Listen to the tonal shift of how that's impossible to, well, no, I'm against it. The conversation's shifting. Check this out.
Really have one on the region? Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mike. You just described perfectly well how successfully U.S. and allies, came up with coordinated response. They defended their ally against drones and missiles coming from terrorist state. This is exactly what the Ukrainian people have been asking for.
I knew this was not going to be about the region, Alex.
I mean,
so first of all, I will take the question, but I'm always going to call on you. I was trying to finish out in the region before coming back to the rest of the world. Go ahead. But
the question I keep hearing from the Ukrainian people is, why do you think they don't deserve the same?
If you look at our commitment to Ukraine, it has included significant provision of missile defense to allow the Ukrainian military to shoot down drones and missiles and attacks on the Ukrainian people. That is something that this administration is committed to, with billions and billions of dollars in weapon systems, and it's not just American weapon systems, but we have worked to source air defense systems from around the world to help defend the Ukrainian people against Russian attacks.
But what happened in Israel last week happens in Ukraine every week. And it bears, I mean, I don't know, we cover this every day, that Ukrainians are facing the same drones coming from Iran, and they give it to Russia to attack on them. My question is, which U.S. that they have seen on TV yesterday, which U.S. is the true friend of Ukraine?
So the English isn't like it's less, I think, is English, and I think it's more the microphone. But the question he's trying to get home to the State Department official is, why is it that the United States is willing to intercept stuff when going to Israel, but not Ukraine? And then he responds a little bit. And the second round of this question is, well, actually, I listened to it one more time here.
I don't know. Israel last week happens in Ukraine every week, and it bears.
Oh yeah, this type of stuff happens in Ukraine every week. You know, these cities getting bombed, buildings getting bombed. Is Ukraine is the America that's a true ally the one that's shooting these down, or the one that's not shooting these down? It's the crux of the question.
So, Alex, I am just going to completely reject the premise of that question. I don't think it accurately represents the United States' commitment to Ukraine. We have been committed to Ukraine since day one. And our record bears that out. When you look at the international coalition that we have assembled to respond to Russia's aggression, to hold Russia accountable through sanctions and export control measures, and again, through the provision of weapons systems. And I mentioned air defense because that's most relevant to your question, but other systems as well, offensive systems that they have used to take the fight to the Russian army and reclaim half the territory that Russia took from them. So I think the premise of the question, frankly, is just a bit absurd, because it does not match the reality of our record when it comes to supporting the Ukrainian people.
Now, this is not the only person who asked this. There was another question to White House spokesperson John Kirby from a different journalist. And he even said, I knew I was going to get this question once he got the question. So it's not like they didn't know that this was eventually going to be called out.
If the U.S.
By the way, look at that tie. Green top, gray, dark blue. It's a choice. I think maybe if the green was changed at the top, I'd like it more. I think I like the bottom half. Oh, sorry, I'm getting distracted. Maybe a different than a white handkerchief if you're gonna. Okay, sorry.
If the U.S. can and allies.
Not to mention, what is that tuck? He could have gone with it. Okay, sorry.
If the U.S. can and allies can help shoot down Iranian drones over Israel, why can't they do the same over Ukraine?
Yeah, I knew this question was coming too. Look, different conflicts, different airspace, different threat picture. And the president has been clear since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine. The United States is not going to be involved in that conflict in a combat role, and we haven't. We have been providing Ukraine the tools that they need to help defend their airspace.
Well, I mean, maybe as of 6 months ago.
And unfortunately, we can't do that right now because we don't have that national security supplemental funding that.
So if you can't do that, okay, so is the question then, without sending over the air defense, like if this bill doesn't pass, then we're just going to sit on our hands and give up? That the president of the United States, who has almost, if not sole control of the executive branch, which dominates the foreign policy scene, has the most control when it comes to foreign policy, isn't going to leverage that in some way to find other avenues to support the Ukrainians, whether it's shooting down unmanned bombs headed for civilian centers or otherwise? Or why not both? If we're not able to provide enough, for example, Patriot air defense systems. That is the question, because if the question is a direct conflict between Russian and American troops, I will say that shooting down Russian missiles is a step closer, but it is not shooting Russian troops. It is just shooting down Russian bombs. By the way, Zelensky eventually called out this issue. Why are you shooting down the bombs headed for Israel, but not the bombs headed for here? Why you're going to directly involve yourself that, but this is too much. And this is what he had to say. I'm not going to watch the whole thing. I'm just going to read what he wrote. The entire world witnessed Allied actions in the skies above Israel and neighboring countries. It demonstrated how truly effective unity in defending against terror can be when it is based on sufficient political will. Israel, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Jordan acted together and with maximum efficiency. Together, they prevented terror from prevailing, and they are working together and in coordination with others to prevent further escalation. Israel is not a NATO member, so no action, such as triggering Article 5, was required, and no one was dragged into the war. They simply contributed to the protection of human life. Shaheeds in the skies above Ukraine sound identical to those over the Middle East. The impact of ballistic missiles, if they are not intercepted, is the same everywhere. European skies could have received the same level of protection long ago if Ukraine had received similar full support from its partners in intercepting drones and missiles. Terror must be defeated completely and everywhere, not more in some place and less in others. I thank everyone in the world, every leader and state who truly assists us with air defense and missiles necessary to protect our skies, as well as training our pilots on F-16s. All of this already works and will continue to work to save lives. However, we can now see how unity can work truly 100%, and how almost 100% of Shaheeds and missiles can be intercepted. We will discuss it with our partners. So yeah, I know these discussions are happening, but look, I've already given my opinion on this. I think that there is a distinction between fighting Russian troops directly and shooting the bombs that they've sent in urban centers, especially if those bombs are entering NATO airspace. I don't even know if it should be really much of a discussion if a bomb enters NATO's airspace, doesn't get shot down. We don't even know where it's headed towards. We can suspect that it's going to turn around to hit Ukraine, but we don't know. It could be haywire, and it could end up striking a village and killing some people, and then you've got a security crisis on your hands. Then you're actually asking questions about Article 5, even though it still would not likely be triggered, because again, neither NATO or Russia wants that sort of war. But after this was posed forward by the Ukrainian president, the next day, when Alex went to ask about this again, mind you, only one day before, he had asked a similar question and got a complete "I reject your premise," almost like this is a ridiculous response. Check out the tonal shift here now that Zelensky is bringing this forward to, to the front of the conversation. That this isn't just, oh, some journalist in the bleachers, but now this is the official representative of the government of Ukraine.
Again, finally on Ukraine, I want to go our back and forth yesterday. I'm sure you have seen President Zelensky's comments yesterday, in which he made it clear that we can now see how unity can work truly 100%, and how almost 100% of Shaheeds and missiles can be intercepted. In fact, the Ukrainian officials don't really understand why is it that the United States is not helping them directly to prevent Russian attacks, at least to the targeting their energy infrastructure.
So a few things. Number one, I saw the comments from the president, very much understand where he's coming from. I would expect the president of any country who is under such withering attacks to look for any way possible to defend his people. Fully understand that. Number two, I think it is important to note the context that we have an entirely different relationship with Ukraine and Israel, in that our relationship with Israel goes back decades, and in terms of a security partnership. We have had a decades-long security partnership with Israel where we have been providing them direct military aid, not just going back 2 years of a conflict, but for decades, and have had long, broad-standing communications between our military and the Israeli military.
Okay, so I will say that the American and Israeli relationship goes back further, but also when the Israelis started an illegal nuclear arms program, and then they still don't even admit to it, and therefore abide by none of the regulations that everybody else does, because they won't even admit they have it, so it's kind of hard to bring in the inspectors and yada, yada, yada. We just accepted it and we moved on. When the Ukrainians inherited a nuclear arsenal that they could use to protect their sovereignty, we told them we would make them an international pariah unless they gave all the missiles to Russia, and then Russia took those missiles and bombed Ukraine with it. So when we talk about like moral responsibility and involvement in the relationship, I would say there's a stronger case on one side to the other side, especially when you consider the fact that on average, the Russian bombs get through more and the Russian bombardment is more constant. This was an Iranian, and could be, if the situation continues as is, just a one-off attack from the Iranians. This is not a one-off attack from the Russians. It's again and again and again. It's weekly. It's weekly. I wasn't in Ukraine 24 hours before the air raid sirens started blaring again. So I would say, yes, the relationship is different. The relationship with Ukraine is more young, but also the war circumstances probably necessitate the interceptions more in Ukraine's case, since infrastructure is being targeted more regularly, more stuff is getting through, their production is being targeted, which would be necessary for their defense, their energy infrastructure and civilian infrastructure is being targeted, which is necessary to sustain human life, which is also necessary to sustain your defense. So I would say that I think there's more of a need in the Ukraine case, and I think there's a good moral argument as well. I don't think the length of the relationship is a good argument here, any more than Trump saying like, hey, the Kurds were with us at D-Day is a good, the Kurds weren't with us at D-Day is a good explanation for his backstabbing of the Kurds in favor of Erdogan and the Turks and their operation into northeastern Syria.
That goes back decades.
I mean, I understand, there's a little bit more intelligence with this comment than the Trump one, but I think that the idea of like, well, the relationship goes back further. I don't think that's a good point.
Israel is a major non-NATO ally of the United States. Ukraine is just in a different position in that we did not have that kind of agreement with them prior to the immediate month.
In fact, isn't the point?
Squid has donated $20.
Hey.
Here's a bit of a contribution to the camera fund. Welcome back to UA. I hope you're doing strong.
Thank
Smiley
you.
Face.
Thank you. I actually ordered the camera. I don't know when it's going to arrive, but I have ordered it. So we are going to have a second camera. And when I do set up the second camera, I am going to put it somewhere over here. And I got a big map of Ukraine here. And so every once in a while, I'm going to turn to that camera and we're going to do like Ukraine report on the big map that I have down here. It just came with the place, so I'm going to use it. What was I? Thank you so much for the $20, Squid. I really do appreciate it. What was I saying before I lost my train of thought?
Major non-NATO ally.
Oh, if we're integrating Ukraine into NATO, I mean, a direct Article 5 commitment will come with that, meaning that if Ukraine is attacked in the future, we'll have to defend them. And we all agreed that Ukraine is eventually, all the NATO member states, except for maybe Hungary, and maybe the new Slovak government, which is quite bad on the issue of Ukraine as well, all agrees that they are going to eventually be within NATO because it's the strongest deterrent. But if you're agreeing to that, if you're saying that eventually they're going to be integrated to the point where they can call upon the United States to directly get involved, I would say that is a more entangled defense commitment than our more, I would say even, or looser or more ambiguous defense commitment to the Israelis outside of the fact we support them. Like, we'll support them with weapons, we'll support them with support. But we didn't put troops on the ground during the 6-day war. We didn't put troops on the ground in any of the other wars. So, I mean, the Article 5 commitment, I will say, is in many ways asking for a deeper commitment than our current commitment to Israel.
Of the United States. Ukraine is just in a different position in that we did not have that kind of agreement with them prior to the immediate months before this conflict. But what you have seen us do since this conflict is provide them with the equipment they need to defend themselves. And that includes, of course, air defense systems, Patriot systems, and other air defense systems that we have either provided the Ukrainian military
up to 6 months ago
ourselves, or we have sourced from other partner and ally countries around the world so they can defend themselves. And much of the reason that they have been able to successfully defend themselves against barrage after barrage after barrage of Russian attacks is because of those air defense systems that we have provided. Now,
until the shipment stopped. Sorry, just got to keep throwing that out there.
That said, you're right that we are not in armed military conflict with Russia, which is what it would require for U.S. planes to be in the skies over Ukraine.
Okay, so, we're at war with Iran. I was unaware. We are in war with Iran. Okay, who's getting drafted? I'm not going to fight that war personally. If you guys want to go fight that war, I'm going to stick in Ukraine. Okay, one war is enough for me. You guys are getting drafted for it. That's your business. I'm staying over here, okay? I'm going to stay in safe Kiev. No, again, there is a difference between striking Russian troops, killing Russian troops, shooting down Russian aircraft, and shooting down missiles and bombs headed for urban centers, headed for civilian infrastructure. There's a difference. You can make that difference. You can make that distinction and that difference clear to the Russians. That could also avoid World War III. You could make that distinction. You could make that difference. Does it come with some risk? Yes, but if you're failing in your ability to protect Ukrainian airspace through air defense production because the Ukrainians cannot make enough air defense on their own. What they're doing to shoot down drones is they're taking multiple machine guns, tying them together, aiming them at the Shaheeds and firing and knocking them out of the sky on the back of pickup trucks. And that's innovative. I mean, it's not really innovative. And that's, you know, unique. It works to a certain extent. You can see a lot of these trucks have actually shot them down, but it's not a sustainable model for air defense, especially when you're talking about things like ballistic missiles. And when you want to get down all the drones and not just maybe a majority, a small majority, not even like 80, 90, but like a majority of them.
Engaging with Russian attacks. And we are not going to be in direct armed conflict with Russia. The President of the United States has made that very clear. I think it's in the interest of the American people that we not be in direct armed conflict between the United States and Russia because we do not want World War III. That said, we are entirely committed to the defense of Ukraine. We have proved that over the past 2 years. The President has proved that by providing American support. And if you want to ask the question about what more we can do, the question is one to put to the United States Congress, because we have a supplemental spending bill that would allow us to provide more equipment, including more air defense systems to Ukraine that they very much need, and we hope that bill will pass.
Look, it doesn't have to be American jets. It doesn't have to be British jets. It doesn't have to be French jets, but it would have to be something to shoot them down. Either Ukraine gets the air defense it needs to do it on its own through a sustained effort from the West, or it gets enough jets so they can maintain it on their own, which we have yet to see the groundwork for that laid. We see the basic groundwork for it, for them having F-16s, but certainly not enough F-16s or enough training for pilots to completely make up for the lack of air defense. Then you're going to have to find other solutions. And this is one pathway. And I think that the French being more verbally open to having troops at least intercepting these missiles, it does not only keep the Russians guessing, knowing that if they escalate, the West still has options to make the war even worse for them, but it would also help protect Ukrainian cities and Ukrainian civilians. And you could make the argument it also protects NATO airspace, since the Russians have had a tricky little habit of having their missiles enter Polish airspace. And if you're Polish, that's probably concerning to you, especially if you're seeing those missiles go over your head, go away, and now you know they're headed for Lviv. Are they going to hit a hospital? Are they going to hit some energy center? Are they going to hit drone production? Who knows? But it's going to hit something. And I'd rather hit nothing.